I had just moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakfield Springs, a place where the grass always looks freshly mowed, and the streets are so pristine they almost feel like a movie set. It's the kind of place that feels too perfect to be real, but then again, who doesn't dream of finding peace in a community like this? It was supposed to be a fresh start for me, a chance to settle down, after years of working a high-stress job and constantly being pulled in 100 different directions. The idea of living in a place where everything was clean, controlled, and dare I say idyllic, seemed like the kind of escape I needed. But the day I witnessed what happened to Mr. Thompson, an elderly vet who'd lived in Oakfield Springs for years, was the day everything shifted. It's funny how you can be going about your business, living your life, and then, in one instant, everything you thought you knew about the world gets turned upside down. I still don't quite understand why the universe sent me to witness that moment. But now that I've seen what I've seen, I can't unsee it. So, I guess I'm telling you this because someone needs to know what really goes on behind the pristine lawns and cookie-cutter houses of Oakfield Springs. It was a Saturday afternoon. The sun was blazing, as Florida's sun tends to do, and I was out walking, exploring my new neighborhood. As I turned a corner, I spotted Mr. Thompson. He wasn't the type to stand out, really just an older man with a cane, his back slightly hunched, moving slowly, but steadily. I hadn't spoken to him much, but I'd seen him sitting by the fountain in the community park a few times. He always smiled and gave me a nod, nothing special, just a quiet man, minding his own business. But today, something was off. He was leaning against a hedge near one of the manicured lawns, his face flushed, his hand clutching his chest. I couldn't tell at first if it was a heart attack or something else, but he was clearly struggling. I immediately walked up to him, ready to ask if he needed help, but before I could even say anything, a security guard came rushing over. His name was Vyn. He was barely out of his teens, dressed in a dark gray uniform that screamed, "I'm in charge," one of those people who got a little too comfortable with a little bit of power. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, kneeling next to Mr. Thompson. Vyn, barely even glancing at me, took a step forward. He didn't look concerned at all, just irritated. "Move along." "He's fine," Vyn said, with a voice dripping with disdain. He didn't even wait for Mr. Thompson to respond, just stood there, watching him struggle. "I don't think he's fine," I said, trying to stand my ground. "He needs medical help." That's when Vyn's attitude shifted, and it wasn't in the direction I was hoping for. Without warning, he grabbed his taser and pointed it at Mr. Thompson. "Stay down, old man," Vyn sneered. "I told you to move. You're causing a scene." I froze for a moment, unable to comprehend what was happening. But then, just as quick as a heartbeat, Vyn pressed the button, and the sound of the taser's crackle filled the air. Mr. Thompson's body jerked, his whole frame seizing, before he collapsed to the ground. It all happened so fast. The world seemed to slow, and my stomach dropped. Here was this man who had fought for his country, who had served with honor, and now he was being treated like an inconvenience. And for what? For asking for help? It didn't sit right with me. It felt wrong in every sense of the word. "Stop. What are you doing?" I yelled, rushing toward them, but Vyn just turned and glared at me. "Mind your business," he snapped. But then, just as the situation seemed to escalate further, a calm voice cut through the tension. "Step away from him," Eleanor's voice rang out from behind me. I turned to see a woman, tall, with a presence that immediately commanded attention. She was calm, but there was something in her eyes, something unyielding, fierce. "I'm Eleanor," she said, moving forward with a purpose. "And you need to step away from that man right now." Vyn, clearly not expecting anyone to challenge him, took a step back. For a moment, he seemed unsure of himself, but then he squared his shoulders and tried to maintain his authority. "What's your problem?" he shot back. Eleanor didn't flinch. Her gaze was unwavering. "The problem, Vyn, is you just tossed an elderly man who was asking for medical help. That's not how we handle things." Her voice was firm, but it had that air of quiet authority that left no room for argument. I had no idea who this woman was, but at that moment, I knew one thing for sure: she wasn't just going to let this slide. And she didn't. Eleanor immediately knelt beside Mr. Thompson, gently helping him sit up. She asked him if he needed medical assistance, introduced herself, and made sure he was as comfortable as possible before the paramedics arrived. But that was just the beginning. As it turned out, Eleanor wasn't just some random person who happened to be passing by. She was the newly appointed chief of civil oversight for the state of Florida, someone whose entire career was dedicated to holding powerful institutions accountable. As she told me later, she'd seen abuse of power before, too much of it, but what she saw that day hit differently. It wasn't just a rogue guard acting out. It was a systemic problem, something much bigger, something that reached deep into the fabric of Oakfield Springs. Over the next few days, Eleanor dug into everything. She uncovered details about the HOA, the security company, and how they were all connected, how they were working together to exert control over the residents. The more she uncovered, the uglier it got. Turns out, Sentinel Security wasn't just a random security company hired to keep the peace. No, they were incentivized to find reasons to find the residents, to take control, to manipulate. The HOA had given them absurdly lucrative contracts, and those contracts were tied to profits. If they could make residents feel unsafe, if they could create an atmosphere of fear, then they could charge more for security and raise fees. It wasn't about safety, it was about money. Eleanor knew that she couldn't let this go. She had to expose it, and she wasn't afraid of the power that stood in her way. She started gathering evidence, documents, testimonies, anything that could paint a picture of how deep the corruption ran. And she didn't stop until she had everything. Then came the confrontation. The HOA had called a meeting, the kind where they thought they could brush everything under the rug, spin a story that would keep everyone in line. But Eleanor wasn't half-wying it. She walked into that room like she owned it, calm, composed, and absolutely unshakable. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, addressing the HOA president with a gaze that could cut through steel. "I've been looking into the practices of your HOA and your security company, and what I found isn't just shocking, it's criminal." What followed was nothing short of cinematic. Eleanor revealed everything. The hidden contracts, the inflated fees, the countless complaints that had been swept under the rug, and the systemic abuse of power that had gone unchecked for years. The room was in shock. The residents, who had been living in fear of the HOA for so long, started to speak up. They demanded answers. They demanded justice. And just like that, the illusion of Oakfield Springs crumbled. The tightly controlled, perfectly manicured community was exposed for what it really was: a house of cards built on lies and manipulation. Eleanor's investigation didn't just stop at the HOA. It went all the way to the top. She brought in law enforcement, local authorities, and even federal agencies. What she uncovered was more than just a corrupt neighborhood, it was a well-oiled machine of exploitation, with powerful people pulling the strings behind closed doors. By the end of it, people were arrested. People were indicted. The security company lost its contract. The HOA board was forced to resign. And the community, for the first time in years, felt like it could finally breathe. Eleanor Vance didn't just expose a scandal. She gave the residents of Oakfield Springs something they hadn't had in a long time: hope. Now, the neighborhood is different. There's a sense of unity, of fairness. People aren't afraid to speak up anymore. And for once, the place where I live actually feels like home. So, here's my question to you. How far would you go to stand up against corruption? Would you have done what Eleanor did, or would you have stayed silent? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The world needs more people like Eleanor.